Chapter 2. A Rozbury Roommate. Dower laid on the top of a bunk bed, staring at the gray slate ceiling of his room at the Academy of Emogic, the view from a small frosted window letting him know it was early morning. The only thing that kept the room from being indistinguishable from a prison cell was how nicely furnished it was, with a dresser, padded bench, and padded chair. The room even had a surprisingly clean private bathroom with running water, a luxury the orphanage never had. There was also the fact he could leave the room, just not the building. It was expected that those who went through an apex of emotion needed to be educated on everything concerning Emogic, so he was confined to the academy until he was properly trained. Might as well have been a prison for that. He already knew everything books had to say on the subject, and he understood how to channel. What then was the point of being a mandatory student? He sat up with a groan. His torso was sore like someone had carried him too roughly, but he had no recollection of the event. Everything was a blur beyond getting back to the orphanage after testing his Emogic. That bothered him. He remembered everything. The sisters said he had a perfect memory, and some clergymen tried to convince him it was a divine gift from heaven. He retorted with asking if heaven gave him his ugliness and inability to speak, too. Some of them even had the gall to say yes. More unnerving than the lack of memory was that he couldn't channel. There was something blocking his attempts to bring the Emogic out, which meant there was an indifference Emogician channeling at him somewhere, or some kind of indifference-emitting device. Dower remembered reading some years ago about the Academy's discovery of being able to take an inanimate object and inject it full of Emogic. But he had never seen such an object in person, at least to his knowledge. They must have used something filled with indifference to keep the newer Emogicians from harming themselves or others, but for Dower, it only made the possibility of communication all the more difficult. On a related note, there was the matter of the snoring coming from below to attend to. There was another kid on the bottom bunk. Snoring didn't usually bother Dower, but at the moment he found it annoying to the point he couldn't think straight.
"Shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up,"
Dower signed. He looked over the edge of his bunk and blew at the sleeping boy's face. The boy didn't stir, so Dower jumped down and pinched his nose shut, jerking back when the boy awoke with a gasp.
"What was that for?"
the boy asked. Dower blinked, unsure what to do.
"You know signs?"
he signed. The boy stared at him, face blank. Dower pointed at himself.
D-O-W-Y-R. "Are you deaf?"
With a roll of the eyes, Dower pointed to his mouth and shook his head, then to his ears and nodded.
"Oh, you just can't speak?"
"This sucks," Dower thought, but he nodded, then pointed at the boy and tried to imitate his snoring.
"Oh, sorry, I didn't know I had a new roommate. I must have been asleep when you got here. My name's Wayne Rozbury."
Wayne looked about Dower's age, maybe even a year older. His short hair was sandy blonde, which nicely complemented his amber eyes. He might even be considered handsome if his ears weren't so lopsided. Dower moved back as Wayne got out of bed and went to the dresser. From the top of it he grabbed one of two journals and a thick paper-wrapped charcoal and held them towards Dower.
"Can you write?"
Wayne asked.
"Finally, I have a voice,"
Dower thought, gladly taking the journal and opening to a blank page to write his name and age on. He wondered for a moment whether he should omit his fake last name, but it had always proved to be an effective test of someone's character to him due to being a religious slur, and he wanted to see what Wayne's reaction would be. Wayne took a single look and smiled.
"Nice to meet you, Dower. I'm only 12, but I hope we can get along. Did they tell you you're Emogic yet?"
Dower blinked, mildly surprised by such a friendly reaction, and also that he was 2 years younger than he looked. The question wasn't out of the ordinary, though, as people who went through an apex of emotion often didn't know what emotion they were going through at the time. Dower shook his head and wrote,
"No, but I've already figured it out anyway. Boredom, class 2.2. "Really? I didn't know boredom was an Emogic. Cool. I'm a class 3 PC magician, a druid."
Dower took an involuntary step back, nearly stumbling.
"This kid's a powerhouse."
And a surprisingly ignorant one at that, if he didn't know boredom was an Emogic. But PC magicians, druids being their nickname, and there was one for every Emogic, had the widest range of capabilities. When channeling, they could calm an angry mob, could listen to the land and communicate with animals and plants, and lastly could use the emotion that nature gave off, if in great enough amount. Out of the 32 emojics, only 6 had been proven to exist in nature so far. Anger, depression, fear, happiness, sadness, and love. Of those, only happiness wasn't terrifying at Class 3 or higher, unless slang counted as terrifying too. Perhaps it did for some.
Don't be scared, Waynon said. Even though I still need to learn how to use my Emogic, we can't channel in here. I don't know how. I've only been here since yesterday afternoon, and was told I'd have my orientation today. But can you tell me what boarding magicians do? And what are they called?
Dower wrote,
Mind intruders. If we get to channel eventually, I'll show you.
Waynon blinked.
Mind intruders? I don't know if I want you to show me.
Dower grinned, but before he could write a reply, the door opened. A slender, middle-aged woman stepped into the room and smiled at them both.
Good morning, students, she said in a soft, smooth voice,
the sort of voice that sounded directed at children who needed to be put to sleep. It reminded Dower of the way clergywomen would talk to congregations and made his ears want to burrow into his skull.
I am Elise, an instructor here at the academy. We are so happy to have you. Breakfast is being served in the mess hall, and afterwards will be your orientation. If you would please follow me.
Dower shared a look with Waynon, but quickly followed after Elise. He was starving, and whatever they had here must be better than the slop at the orphanage. Waynon was right behind him, and they walked down a wide, white marbled hallway. Lightstones embedded in the ceiling and walls glowed a little brighter as they passed. The doors of other student rooms were spaced evenly across the way on both sides. Many such students were walking the hall too, hurrying along to breakfast or classes. They all looked older, mainly young adults, but even a few that looked well into their 30s. Apexes of emotion were rare among children to early teens, so Dower doubted he'd meet many students around his age. He tried to reach within and channel, but still found himself blocked off from his Emogic and grunted in annoyance.
Heaven is stupid, he signed. Hell is stupid. The Sentinels are stupid. The snakes are stupid. They're all just stupid, stupid, stupid.
He chuckled to himself as people gave him odd passing stares. They probably had no idea he was blaspheming in front of them. Nothing about their ridiculous religion mattered to him. If heaven and hell were real, or any of the Sentinels and snakes for that matter, they never showed it. As far as he was concerned, this life was demanding enough as it was without the need to worry about pleasing gods or whatever came after. Perhaps that was because the local clergy were so demanding to be pleased, not that he obliged. Sure, the pastors and teachers at the mandatory church services and classes he was forced to attend tried to make him change his ways, but they so flagrantly flaunted hypocritical teachings and ideas not even found in the Five Sentinels that it was child's play to dismiss nearly everything they said. If they wanted to use a book to rationalize their actions or moral foundation, they at least ought to know the book inside and out. So many clergymen who tried to teach him only seemed to know half of what he did, if not less. They turned down another hall where a faint mass of voices could be heard. The noise grew until Elise brought them to a large series of arches that opened to the mess hall, where a myriad of men and women, ranging from teenagers to middle-aged, sat at tables eating and chatting with one another or waiting in line to get food. A number of long counters stood at the far end of the room where the people lined up, and beyond them was the largest kitchen Dower had ever seen. Cooks and kitchen servants darted around to replace empty platters on the counters. Each new platter looked like a work of art, with all the colors of a rainbow in fruits and vegetables purposely placed to draw eyes towards the center. The art pieces were quickly ruined once hungry hands got a hold of them, and despite Dower's own grumbling stomach, he shed an invisible tear for them. Other platters were far plainer. There were a couple with large bowls of various stews, one purely for mashed potatoes, another for steamed vegetables, and the last Dower could make out held a variety of breads and cheeses. There was no meat to be seen, which was well and good in his mind. He had never tasted meat, and did not intend to. The closest to it he had tried was salmon, which he quickly decided was not for him.
Go ahead and get in line, Elise said. An orientation leader will be here to show the new students around and give you your schedules.
Elise disappeared back into the hall, leaving the two boys gawking at the scene. Waynon turned to Dower, looking a bit pensive.
You can go first.
Dower could barely make out his voice, but he nodded and moved towards the line, stepping lightly. He never liked loud crowds of people, and usually felt like he was getting in someone's way when trying to navigate through them. The line moved slow, allowing him to grab a little of everything, not even worrying if he would be able to eat it all. Recovering from channeling too much the evening before had taken its toll on his stomach. His hands were starting to tingle from hunger. They sat in the emptiest corner of the room and ate in silence, though the rate at which Dower stuffed himself was anything but silent. Dower looked as if he wanted to ask a question, but Dower hadn't brought the journal to respond and still couldn't channel. That hardly mattered to him right now, as this food was so much better than what was served at the orphanage. Satisfied hums were the only thing worth being communicated at a time like this. Though once his mouth acclimatized to the tastes, he did think about teaching Wayne how to sign, wondering if he could channel the knowledge straight into his mind. The books he read said mind intruders could do things like that, and it would make the process much faster, but he hadn't the slightest idea of how it was done. Perhaps there was another mind intruder that could teach him, or an empath that had experience with boredom. When Dower finished eating, Wayne stared at his empty plate in disbelief.
My mom always said I ate too fast, he said. I think she was wrong now.
Dower gave him a toothy grin, but it was short-lived as a call went out to all the new students to come to the front of the mess hall for orientation. Wayne did his best to stuff whatever's left on his platter into his mouth before getting up after Dower. The orientation leader was a short, stocky man who looked to be in his 30s. When all the new students had gathered to him, he led them into the hall to speak. "All right, everyone," he said. "Let's start with names, emojics, and classes if you know them. I'm Dane, Class 1.9 Puffer and Proud." Dower rolled his eyes at the lame joke, but a few students chuckled, and then everyone began giving their names. There were just over a dozen students, most of them young, but all of them older than Dower. Some didn't know their class level, but they gave their emojics, most of them the more common types such as anger, fear, shame, and worry. The negative emojics were always overrepresented. When it got to Dower's turn, Wayne spoke up for him.
This is Dower. He can't speak, but he's a Class 2.2 boredom magician.
"A mute?" Dane asked. "Can he sign?" Dower nodded vigorously and signed,
Yes, and for the love of hell, get me an interpreter.
Dane looked surprised and took on a stern tone. "You better be careful with what you let those hands of yours say. You can never tell who understands them. I'll let you off the hook this time, but I better not see language like that again." Dower pursed his lips and sullenly signed,
Yes, sir.
Then put his hands behind his back to make a rude comment. "Good. All right, students, if you'll follow me. You may have heard that the academy doesn't work like regular schools. There are no semesters, grades, or tests. It's purely lessons and training from the start. Every day new Emogicians arrive needing to be trained to understand what it means to be one and how not to hurt themselves or others with their power. You're here for 3 months for that purpose alone. I'll walk you through the process of how your first month will go, starting with the classrooms and lecture halls you'll be going to. First up, of course, is the chapel.